Good afternoon, everyone. I am George Chua, the 2016 FINEX president and currently the president and CEO of Bayan Auto. I will be your MC and moderator for today's general membership meeting. Before we officially start the program, I would like to share with you the following committee announcements. The CFO of the Year Award Committee is already accepting nominations for this year's search. You may visit www.ingfinexcfooftheyear.com for more details. Deadline for submission is on July 31st, 2020. The Business Education Committee of the FINEX Foundation will hold its first webinar for our finance and business educators on June 22nd, 2020, with the theme, Understanding How Businesses Are Coping with COVID-19 Impact. The speakers are 2018 FINEX President, 2020 FINEX Academy Chair, and Punong Bayan and Arroyo Grant Thornton CEO Marivic Españo, 2020 FINEX President, and Pilipinas Shell CFO Jeng Pascual, and 2015 FINEX President and Ortigas Land CEO Jimmy Ismael. This will be followed on July 15th at 10 a.m. on Teaching Business Under the New Norm with speakers FEU President Dr. Michael Alba, DLSU Vice Chancellor for Admin Dr. Arnel Uy, and UA&P Associate Professor Marivic Caparas. On June 24th, the ICT Committee will sponsor its second webinar entitled Retail E-Commerce in the New Normal. Lazada Philippines CEO Ray Alimorong and Zalora Philippine CEO Paulo Campos will be our speakers. On July 3, the Financial Inclusion Committee will hold its third webinar on strengthening supply chain finance. Addressing today's challenges, speakers Jin Chang Lai of IFC, DTI Assistant Secretary Mary Jean Pacheco, and Taiwan Association of Banking and Finance President Dr. Hank Huang. On July 7th, our Junior FINEX Committee will sponsor a webinar for the finance and business students and your professionals with the theme, Adapting to Life's New Norm. Dr. Jasmine Vergara, WHO Mental Health National Professional Officer, will talk about managing distress in challenging times. Tatagan Online Project Leader Gina Hechanova will discuss enabling resilience in times of social distancing. And Natasha Goulburn Foundation founder Jean Goulburn will share the inspiration for mind-healthy Filipinos. A speaker from the Psychological Association of the Philippines will talk on mental wellness. On July 9th, the Media Affairs Committee will sponsor a webinar on effective media communication in time of COVID-19. Speakers are Nielsen Media Executive Director Ernestine Ampere, Facebook Philippines FinServe Head Pat Del Castillo, and the Manila Times President and CEO Dante Francis Klink Ang II. On July 15th, the Environment Committee of the FINEX Foundation will sponsor our general membership meeting with the theme Environment and Health in Post-COVID-19 World. Speakers are WWF Philippines Executive Director Joel Palma, and PH Labs Chief Planetary Doctor, Dr. Ramon Lorenzo Ginto. Lastly, the Professional Development Committee will hold its annual mid-year economic briefing on July 31st. Speakers will be BlackRock's Head of Southeast Asia Client Business, Vishal Agarwal, BDO Unibank's Head of Trust and Investment Group, Asset Management, Fritz Ocampo, and Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development, Dr. Alvin Ang. These are just some of our upcoming events. For complete updates, please log on to our website at www.finex.org.ph and follow our various social media accounts as shown on your screen. We would also like to thank our year-round sponsors. We have Platinum sponsor, Pilipinas Shell Petroleum Corporation. Diamond sponsor, ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation and San Miguel Corporation. Gold sponsor, BDO Unibank and PNA Grant Thornton. And our minor sponsor is NGCP and Santa Lucia Land. Once again, thank you to our sponsors. And now we have our National Affairs Committee announcement to be made by Mr. Eduardo Yap, our Chairman of the National Affairs Committee. Eddie, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to make this report to you. We face a crisis unlike anything the world has seen, according to the IMF. Aside from stimulus support, one other way to recover is to remove the stumbling block to economic growth posed by severe traffic congestion and public transportation inefficiency. Let me share with you a slide. Okay. Here we are. Okay. So this slide shows the problem. As you know, the traffic congestion and public transportation inefficiency have been causing economic productivity losses estimated at 3 billion pesos per day or 1.1 trillion pesos per annum, equivalent to a huge 6.5% of GDP. Now, I am pleased to inform you that FINEX is helping alleviate this great problem. Yes, FINEX is. Now, the Inquirer front page headline treatment to the ongoing Edsel transformation for buses show you the great importance attached to this reform. Now, the next slide will show you the new normal, okay? With the new busway at the innermost lane. I took the bus from Edsel North Avenue to Ayala Makati. It took only 27 minutes, unlike before. Now, what happened was before this, on May 10, I published an article with the title, "Don't Waste a Crisis." Essentially, I said that a return to the status quo ante is not acceptable to the public and reiterated my advocacy of 5 years ago that a new busway is needed, and that this COVID crisis is the opportunity to experiment this new system. So, um, the FINEX board made a timely intervention, the right push at the right time. And after the endorsement of NAC, the board, with the leadership of President Jeng Pascual, had the advocacy approved by the board. So following that, what happened was NAC held a webinar wherein I presented my advocacy for bus system reforms. And the this this was the flyer. We had 2 guests and then 3 panelists, as you can see. Now, on May 18, I had a long teleconference with Secretary Tugade and his team, and he promised that he's determined to institute this reform and proceeded to do it. So FINEX again issued a public statement hailing the bus system transformation on EDSA. And this was noted by the Department of Transportation in a press release that it issued, expressing great appreciation to the support being rendered by FINEX. Now, this will be the new normal on EDSA. Buses will run efficiently, while on the car lanes, if the MMDA does not institute more effective car reduction measures, it will remain congested. But there is hope because Singapore has a model for that. Now, on the next activity, I would like to quickly inform you is the virtual roadshow that was co-hosted by FINEX and MAP, and together with 23 other business and professional organizations. Now, as you can see on the screen, we had all 4, the Secretary of Finance, Carlos Dominguez, Acting NEDA Secretary Carl Chua, BSP Governor Benjamin Diokno, and then the Presidential Assistant on BBB projects, Vicencio Dizon, all 4 of them in this one joint meeting. And these are the participating organizations that you can see on the screen. I'll just quickly go through. Now, as you can see from this flyer, the speakers, the participating organizations, and at the bottom, the panelists consisting of myself, representing FINEX, Victor Paterno of the Makati Business Club, Ambassador Dicky Yuhico of PCCI, Nabil Francis of the European Chamber. Now, significantly, in this virtual joint meeting, a joint statement of support for the enactment of CREATE Bill, which is the revised CITIRA Bill, was co-signed by 32 organizations and presented to Secretary Dominguez, who expressed his great satisfaction to FINEX as one of the co-hosts of this event. Now, I should mention that this meeting was a blockbuster in the sense that 1,000, the full 1,000 in Zoom was taken by registrants, and then over 13,000 viewed the streaming of this event in the Facebook page of FINEX. Now, I would like to end by saying that I would like to thank President Jeng Pascual for quickly approving this unprecedented joint meeting that we had the opportunity to present to the public, covering the all-important economic bounce back plan. Now, we in FINEX, NAC, are working behind the scenes, and we are doing our part for FINEX to play a significant role and be relevant on national issues. So to my colleagues in FINEX, I would like to invite you to join us. Your participation will be helpful and most welcome. So as you can see, this is the chart of organization. Quickly, my colleagues were helping in this committee, and the next slide will show the active members. Now, thank you very much for this opportunity to report to you. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Eddie, for the updates. And now we will move on to the next part of the program, which is our call to order. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third virtual general membership meeting of FINEX. To formally open the program, may I call on our president, Mr. Jeng Pascual, to call this meeting to order.
Thank you very much, George and Eddie. And good afternoon, fellow FINEX members. I would like to call today's FINEX General Membership Meeting to order.
And then we will now have our invocation and Philippine National Anthem. Thank you, Jeng. May I request everyone to join me in prayer and singing of the National Anthem. So let's start with a prayer. So Father God, all glory, honor, and blessing, all power and might, all praise and thanksgiving be to you, Abba Father, to us all. We stand on your word, declaring that when we call upon you, you will answer us and be with us in distress. Our deliverer and healer, we seek your protection for our families and all of us, from the scourge of COVID-19 and all manner of disease and affliction. We pray especially for our health workers who tirelessly perform their duties at great risk to themselves. We pray for all of us co-workers in the business community that we may perform our tasks with great diligence in these difficult times, to serve each other and our country in solidarity and spirit of social responsibility. We pray for all those in authority in government and the private sector that they may have all wisdom, competence, and strength to lead us and serve through this period of crisis, with special attention to our poor and disadvantaged brethren who are struggling to survive. We pray for reconciliation and peace among all Filipinos as we come to better realize our oneness as people. In good times and bad, as a common dread unites us, so in acknowledge of our dependence on you and in obedience, we approach you, Father God, humble ourselves and pray, seek your presence and turn from our evil ways, that you may listen from heaven, forgive our sins and revive our land. In loving name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen. We shall now have the national anthem. Thank you. Once again, may I call on our President, Mr. Jeng Pascual, for his President's time.
Thank you very much, George. Good afternoon, FINEX members and guests, and welcome once again to our June 2020 General Membership Meeting. This month, we remember our dear departed friend and colleague, Grace Palma-Tionco. Grace was former Executive Vice President, past Internal VP, Treasurer and Secretary, trustee in both the Foundation and Academy, one of the ICFC founders, and chair of various FINEX committees over her almost 37-year story, even love affair with FINEX. Grace was always present for FINEX and for her friends, a presence that will be sorely missed. Let us pause for a moment of silence for the eternal repose of her soul. This month, we also witness the gradual reopening of the economy with a downgrade from MECQ to GCQ over Metro Manila and other key areas starting 1st of June. Workers headed back to their jobs, which hopefully were still there. Construction activities resumed, malls reopened, and cars piled up once again on major thoroughfares. After 2.5 months of observing quarantine, people felt the need to go out and explore and re-envision the world through the lens of the new normal. But the threat of COVID-19 is still out there. And we are seeing a resurgence of the disease in different places, both here and abroad. The risk has not changed. Therefore, it is our mindset and behavior that need to. These shifts in mindset and behavior are opportunities to adapt and remain healthy and competitive as individuals and businesses. Of equal importance are the opportunities we create to support and learn from each other. It is therefore opportune to check our facts and learn from those who experienced COVID-19 firsthand. I would like to welcome our guest speakers, Dr. Edsel Salvana, Director of the UP Institute of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology, and Mr. Horacio Howie Severino, GMA News anchor and journalist. In line with our commitment to promote the personal and professional development of our members, our committees also held a number of learning interventions the past month. The FINEX Membership Committee, Overall Chair, Caloy Cervantes, Recruitment and Retention Subcommittee Chair, Jet Pampolina, and the rest of their committee members organized a very engaging fireside chat session last 8th of June, with our current ING FINEX CFO of the Year, Toti Bengson. I wish to thank Toti for sharing his time, his insights, and his story with our fellow FINEX members. And yesterday, June 16, our Professional Development Committee led by Ned Goseco and the FINEX Academy, chaired by past President Marivic Españo, organized a very insightful session on coaching amidst crisis, where both coachee leaders and executive coaches shared experiences on how professional dilemmas during this crisis were addressed through coaching. We also had the opportunity to learn from our national and local government leaders. Last month's GMM, held on the 15th of May, featured NEDA Acting Secretary Carl Chua, who outlined the government's economic strategy under the theme Philippine Priority Projects, Road to Recovery. Our Program and Meetings Committee, chaired by Nanette De Jesus, continued to ensure the relevance of our GMMs. On 28 May, as Eddie mentioned earlier, we brought together the Finance Secretary Sonny Dominguez, BSP Governor Ben Diokno, NED Acting Secretary Carl Chua, and BCDA President Vivencio Dizon to share the Philippine Economic Bounce Back Plan. And on June 11, we had the opportunity to engage Parañaque Mayor Edwin Olivares on his experience in dealing with the challenges of local government during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a dialogue that is part of the local government series sponsored by the Good Governance Committee chaired by Rod Franco in partnership with PNA Grant Thornton. It is also one of FINEX's key missions to advocate for business and finance policies and legislation that spur national development. In the past month, we led the crafting of or participation in a number of public statements targeted at reforms and measures to support the recovery of the economy. On May 28, we authored and presented the joint statement signed by 32 business organizations supporting the passage of the CREATE law. And many thanks to our National Affairs Committee Chairman Edel and past President Dick Dubeladad for penning this. On June 8, we raised our concern on the inequities contained in the proposed Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 by issuing a public statement opposing its enactment, as well as we co-signed a separate joint statement initiated by MVC. We urged Congress to instead focus on passing reform laws such as CREATE that are so badly needed to spur economic recovery. Crafting of the FINEX statement was led by the NAC. On June 1, we issued another press statement congratulating the Department of Transportation with the bold steps it had taken to reform public bus service on Edsel, and this is what Edel had already mentioned earlier. On the 31st of May, we co-signed a joint statement on the rule of law in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic initiated by the Judicial Reform Initiative. The joint statement was endorsed to the board by the Good Governance Committee. And on June 3, we co-signed the joint statement initiated by MAP supporting the passage of the ARISE bill, formerly the Philippine Economic Stimulus Act. There are ongoing discussions now on which of these bills support the recovery of the economy. And we are looking at these because so far these bills have not yet been passed.
Ross?
As you see, we are busier than ever as an organization during these trying times, and we continue to look forward to the eventual recovery of the Philippine economy. The success of our economic recovery depends largely on the shift in our mindset and behaviors. COVID-19 was a perfect storm that ravaged supply and demand. Businesses, with the help of government, are reopening to establish supply, but demand will return only if there is opportunity and confidence to spend. The lifting of quarantine provides opportunity to spend, but it is the change in mindset and behavior, adhering to health protocols and respecting each other's desire to stay healthy, that will bring the confidence to spend. We all need to play our part. And by the way, if there is a choice, please prefer to spend what is proudly Philippine-made. Thank you, everyone, and mabuhay ang FINEX.
Thank you, President Jeng. And just for the information of everybody on our Zoom conference, there are a total of 157 participants as of now, excluding the participants that we have in both YouTube and Facebook live stream. Just a reminder to all our attendees, if you have questions for our speakers, please type them in the Q&A tab, not in the chat box. We will ask your questions during the open forum. To formally introduce our speakers, may I now call on our FINEX Director, Mr. Domingo Go, to do the introduction. Doming.
Good afternoon, colleagues in FINEX, friends, ladies and gentlemen. In the interest of time, please allow me to introduce both our speakers. First, an introduction of our second speaker, to be followed by my introduction of the first speaker. Our second speaker for today, I am sure he is familiar to many of us who have seen him on television, has had a distinguished career both as a journalist for 32 years and a leading documentary filmmaker, having produced over 200 TV documentaries, at least a dozen of which have won domestic and international awards. He was at various times a newspaper reporter, a book and magazine editor, and was co-founder of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, of which he is still chairman of the Board of Trustees. On TV, if you recall, he was on a probe team for 4 years with Cheche Lazaro before joining Eyewitness, now one of the longest-running public affairs program in the Philippines. For 8 years, he also anchored the morning news at GMA News TV, and from 2009 to 2014, he was editor-in-chief of GMA News Online, as well as head of the social media operations for GMA News. At present, he is the vice president of GMA Network, responsible for the training and development of its journalists. A proud alumnus of the Ateneo de Manila High School, our speaker finished his degree in history, magna cum laude, from the Tufts University in Massachusetts, and his master's degree in environment, development, and policy at the Sussex University in the United Kingdom. On the personal side, let me say that I admire him for his advocacy for Filipinos to learn the ancient script called Baybayin, which he points out is a vital part of our identity as Filipinos. In an article he wrote in May 2019, he proudly points out that learning Baybayin and teaching it to others brings about an empowering fountain of youth feeling, and that the even greater emotion is the feeling of connection to one's deeper self, to the blood of one's ancient ancestors, a feeling of wholeness. But this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, he joins us not so much as a journalist or an advocate of Baybayin, but rather as a COVID-19 survivor after spending 11 days in isolation in a hospital facility. And so we are indeed honored to have the very distinguished Horacio Howie Severino to share with us later on his COVID-19 journey. Also this afternoon, we have for our first speaker, a person of authority in infectious diseases, and I'm sure quite a number of us read his Facebook blogs on the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. He finished his BS Biology, magna cum laude, and his degree in medicine from the University of the Philippines, and subsequently received his training in internal medicine at the Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. He likewise trained in infectious diseases and tropical medicine at the University Hospital's Case Medical Center and the Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. In 2008, he returned as a balik scientist of the Department of Science and Technology. And currently, he is the director of the Institute of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology at the National Institutes of Health at UP Manila, and is an associate professor of medicine at the Philippine General Hospital. He is likewise an adjunct professor for global health at the University of Pittsburgh and has co-authored over 60 papers in international conferences and has peer-reviewed journals and written 12 book chapters and review articles. In addition to being selected as an outstanding young scientist by the National Academy of Science and Technology, he has been awarded the Outstanding Young Men Philippine Award for his work in HIV. Moreover, he has also been selected as one of the 10 outstanding young persons of the world, as well as a young physician leader of the Inter-Academy Medical Panel of the World Academy of Sciences. In 2017, he was chosen as a TED Fellow and spoke about the global implications of the emerging HIV epidemic in the Philippines in his TED Talk. He has recently been awarded a Senior TED Fellowship in recognition of his work in restoring vaccine confidence and improving science communication to the public. We are therefore very honored, ladies and gentlemen, to have Dr. Edsel Salvana share with us today the latest issues in the COVID-19 testing and treatment protocol. Dr. Salvana, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Good afternoon to everyone. I've been having internet issues the whole day, so if I suddenly drop out, I apologize. I can always send the lecture slides, but I'm gonna do my best here. I'm gonna start sharing my slides now. Let's see. Can protocol. There's a lot to cover, but I'm just gonna try to go through it as an overview. Because there is a lot of detail that's really involved here. So just very basic, the disease is called COVID-19. It's caused by the virus called SARS-CoV-2, and CoV is really just a temporary name. from a timeline that started in December when we started to see clusters of pneumonia cases in Wuhan. In January 2020, we started to see progression as the epidemic progressed. In February 2020, unfortunately, the Philippines had a distinction of having the first death outside China. And then it took about 4 more weeks before we had our another bunch of cases, case 5 and 6. 4, 5, and 6 showed up in early March. And this is where we started to declare ECQ in first GCQ in March 12, ECQ subsequently thereafter. And we did this at only about 52 cases. So we were one of the first developing country capitals to shut down. And it's a good thing too, because if you look at the epidemics in the United States, where now they have almost 120,000 deaths, and we've only had over 1,000 deaths. The earlier you shut down, the better. Mexico now is shut down about 10 days after us, and they're seeing 5,000 cases a day, and much more cases than us. So in April, May, after the ECQ, we started to see some indications of flattening, which gave the government a way to start to decrease the lockdown. However, we started to see an increase in cases again, although a lot of this is backlog as well. So there's definitely been an increase, and we expect this because of the releasing the lockdown. But it's actually a lot more gradual if you distribute the cases over time. But there's definitely been an increase, so we need to remain vigilant. And now with Cebu in ECQ again, hopefully we won't have any other provinces that need to go back to ECQ. As has been said, NCR is just kind of pasang-awa because our target is a 7-day doubling time, and we just barely made it to that. So this is just an explanation of why we shut down. It's not because we're trying to completely eliminate the virus. It's very difficult, although some countries we're trying to do that. There is no immunity to this virus. So, until we get a good vaccine, we're going to continue to see cases. But what you really want to do with your lockdowns is to preserve your healthcare system so that the capacity does not get overwhelmed. That's what we really did during the ECQ, is we try to increase capacity of the healthcare system, at the same time trying to prevent it from being overwhelmed so that there will be fewer deaths. This is about coronavirus. Is the closest relative. It has about 96% of the genome matching. So that's probably where it came from. The incubation period is about 5 days, and the usual symptoms are fever, cough, colds, sore throat. If it's a little worse, then you can get shortness of breath. If you look, this table is actually kind of busy, but it's very, very common to see fever. But again, these are from hospitalized cases. So these are more severe. We know that there are people, 80% of people who have mild symptoms, and controversially, there are people with very few symptoms or are completely asymptomatic. We're not going to go into that today. Now, the main mode of transmission remains respiratory droplet, which is about 3 to 6 feet before the droplets fall out. There is some evidence of airborne transmission, especially in hospitals where they do aerosolizing procedures, but the vast majority will still be 3 to 6 feet. And that is why if you do social distance or physical distancing of about 3 feet, then you actually decrease the risk of acquisition by about 80%. Universal masking will decrease the risk by 85%, and a face shield will decrease it by 78%. If you combine all three, then you can decrease the risk by more than 90%. The overall mortality has been evolving now that we're testing more mild symptoms. It seems to be about 0.5 to 1.5%, but without any immunity, that's and even a 0.5% mortality of 70% of our population is about 3 million people. So that is still going to be a bad number of people that will be affected if we're not careful. This is much more transmissible than MERS and SARS as well. So age distribution, most people you can see between the ages of 40 to 79 still get it. Very few below 19 years old. But I think this is also an artifact of the fact that we were testing people who had more severe symptoms. And we know that people who are older will have more severe symptoms, and people who are younger have mild symptoms or may not have any symptoms at all. We know that people above 80 years old can have up to a 15% mortality rate, which is pretty severe. Whereas those between the ages of 19 to 10 to 60 to 70 years old, the average of that is about 1%. Below 9 years old, it's rarely fatal, although we are seeing some problems with severe disease. The other thing that predisposes to deaths are pre-existing illnesses, just like cardiovascular disease and diabetes and chronic respiratory disease. Now, what's the status of treatment and vaccination? There's been a lot of drugs that are being studied right now. So remdesivir, which has been approved in the United States, has a modest effect. It decreases the length of stay. And everyone is aware now of last night's announcement that dexamethasone actually decreased deaths by 1/3 in ventilated patients and by about 1/5 in those requiring oxygen. But it had no effect on those with mild disease. So, you know, dexamethasone itself, being a corticosteroid, can be harmful and increase your risk of infection, as a matter of fact. So this is not a preventive treatment. This is a treatment that we give to people who have overactive immune systems caused by the virus. So you're trying to modulate the immune system so that it doesn't overreact, and this is what the dexamethasone is doing. This is almost like a last-ditch effort because, again, dexamethasone is bad for your immune system, and what you're really trying to do is to try to modulate it so that it doesn't attack your body as much. There are also combination treatments. There are drugs called monoclonal where the sites of action of these drugs are. You can see here, we don't have camostat or arbitol here, but chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine act at different stages of the life cycle, particularly with membrane fusion and endocytosis. It does have some effect on the entry of the virus. You can see lower down, lopinavir, ritonavir, ribavirin, remdesivir, and favipiravir act on the viral RNA-dependent polymerase. And so these are all in clinical trials. Going back to the slide before, whoops, sorry about that. I think I got cut off. Let me share again. I think I got cut off. Share the screen again. Okay, apologies for that. This is a list of the vaccines that are in clinical trials. There's over 120 kinds of vaccines that have been discovered. 8 of them are in clinical trials. One of them, which is the Moderna vaccine, is going into a phase 3 clinical trial by July. And so we expect that there might actually be good results of that by September. And they're already starting to manufacture this for public use. And so if it shows that the phase 3s look okay, we might have a vaccine for public distribution by September. So everyone is actually keeping their fingers crossed on that. Again, this is the vaccine candidate, and there's over 120 vaccine molecules. Then very briefly, just the tests that are so very controversial, the RT-PCR tests and the antibody tests. Right now, RT-PCR is really the for acute disease. So anybody who has symptoms should actually be tested with an RT-PCR. The antibody tests are not as sensitive in people who are acutely ill. The other problem with the RT-PCR, though, it does not distinguish between infectious disease virus and remnants, viral remnants. So this is not something we use as a test for cure anymore. It does need a BSL-2 facility. You know, the UPNIH test, the Gene Expert, Sanshore, these are all RT-PCRs, and there are other formats that are on the way. The advantages are, this is the standard for diagnosis. It will pick up pre-symptomatic people who don't have symptoms yet, but will have symptoms in about 2 to 3 days. This is a known technology. It's very, very specific. So very few false positives. However, it's expensive. Even the nasal swab that we do will miss about 1/3 of COVID positive patients. It's not something we use as a test for cure anymore, and it is prone to contamination if the lab is not very good at what it's doing. So what does a positive RT-PCR mean? If it's, well, you hope it's a true positive. Sometimes it can be a contaminant. Sometimes it can be inhaled virus that will not actually lead to disease. This is like what you hear with a dog in Hong Kong being positive na inhaling niya yung sa master niya. Or residual infection, and now we know that these are not actually contagious anymore. So if it's negative, it could be a true negative, or you did the test too early. We know that if you do the test at least before 3 days from exposure, no, I mean after 3 days of exposure, you might not actually get a positive result because the amount of virus is not high enough. Or IgG or both. This is best used at 7 days of symptoms or at least 7 days of symptoms. So if you use this on asymptomatics, you might have this quickly. BRNP we don't have, it's not practical, it's not something we're going to use. ELISA, which is coming, which actually there's at least a couple of ELISAs that are present now. This is lab-based, accurate, 99% sensitive, 100% specific if done 14 days after the onset of symptoms. The rapid point-of-care test, right now we've had some issues with sensitivity, especially if you use it 14 days before the onset of symptoms, and it seems like there's only 1 or 2 kits that are actually more than 90% sensitive and specific, which is what has been set by the latest department memorandum. You can look at FIND, which is the WHO affiliated lab, to see how accurate these antibody tests are. But I would caution you in using rapid antibody tests, especially the ones that are not properly validated, because there is a wide variety that actually has failed validation. So the advantages of antibody tests: even if the virus is gone, so somebody has actually recovered, it can still remain positive, but it remains positive longer with the ELISAs and not with a rapid antibody test. This is less resource intensive. It's a blood test, and so you don't need sophisticated equipment unless it's an ELISA. Once validated, can be used to assess recovery. Right now, we're not sure if the antibodies that we're measuring are what we call neutralizing antibodies, which is what you need for immunity. But it will tell you that the patient has been infected, although some of them can be false positives. But these are on the way. Some of the ELISAs are actually now measuring a very good surrogate for neutralizing antibody. So hopefully we can use that to say who is not likely to get sick because they've already had it before. So watch out for that. The limitations are it cannot diagnose early disease. It's actually practically useless if you use it on someone who has only had symptoms for less than 7 days. Again, IgG does not mean immunity, but some of the ELISAs and not the rapid test kits may actually be able to measure immunity, but we're still validating that. It is prone to false positives. If the prevalence of disease in your population So what does a positive antibody test mean? It could be a true positive or it's a false positive because the IgM is cross-reacting with something, IgG is cross-reacting with something, or it's a defective test. What's a negative antibody test? Either it's a true negative or you did it too early, again, less than 7 days from onset of symptoms. Even if you have COVID, it's going to be negative because you haven't had a chance to make antibodies yet. Some people don't make very much antibodies, and so to see the line on the test result, you need a certain amount of antibody. This is where ELISAs are better because the ELISAs will actually measure a much lower level of antibody in the blood. And then, of course, there's kit failures. So to understand how this works, there is no good test for an asymptomatic carrier. Even RT-PCRs, more than 3 days before the symptoms are going to come out, it's still going to be negative. And even if you have symptoms, 1/3 of it will be negative. But the rapid antibody tests, less than 7 days, wala talagang magpa-positive sa kanila, even if you have COVID. So if you are looking for asymptomatic carriers, it's better to use RT-PCR, but even that's not perfect. So you really have to kind of COVID-proof just assume that may makakalusot. And then so you have to kind of COVID-proof your business talaga para kung kahit may makalusot, hindi magkakahawahan. And then rapid tests can be used for sero surveys and other things, but it's really not something that's a good test for people with symptoms or who were exposed to known cases is RT-PCR. And the antibody tests, actually now we don't even need testing to clear for quarantine because we know that 10 days after the onset of symptoms, most people will no longer be infectious, even if their antibody, even if their RT-PCR is still positive because that's already dead virus. And then for sero surveys and convalescent serum donation. I'm not going to go through this. This is just the PSMID algorithm that says that the only test you really need to clear someone for work is to ask them about symptoms in the last 14 days. And if they did not have symptoms in the last 14 days, then you already eliminate 85% of the potential transmission. And any other test on top of that is not cost effective. You can do an RT-PCR if you want, but it's expensive and it won't catch more than half of your asymptomatic carriers. And again, the rapid antibody test, if you decide to do that, it's really something you should look at afterwards, 14 days from symptom onset, because it's not going to be positive early on. And you should use a validated test. So how to restart work? This has already been discussed by a lot. Again, symptoms is very, very important. All symptomatic workers should be tested with RT-PCR. No need to test anyone who is asymptomatic as long as they didn't have any contact with anyone in the last 14 days who had RT-PCR positive COVID-19. And then again, it's impossible to capture all asymptomatic carriers, even with the tests that we have. So we need to social distance, universal masking, staggered shifts, and then basically you have to do temperature and symptom checks every day. Anyone who becomes asymptomatic should be isolated and tested with RT-PCR, and close contacts of RT-PCR need to be isolated and quarantined. And just very briefly, these are the things you can do to protect your company. It's really, there's a hierarchy of controls. The masks, the PPE, these are at the very bottom. But very important is that the workplace needs to be engineered. There's like one-way flow. If you can keep your workers on site rather than having to commute back and forth daily, again, it's, the cost is considerable as well. But these are the things that you can do to minimize the risk of transmission. So for the foreseeable future, there's no immunity until a vaccine arrives. Work from home is still best. If transport issues can be resolved, you can bring them back to the physical office. Airflow, ventilation, distancing, mass sanitation are the most relevant concerns, and we really have to be innovative in these trying times. There are other tests that are on the way, including antigen tests that need to be validated. I'm not going to go through these because we don't really have much time. So in summary, COVID-19 is a worldwide challenge, major impact on work. Symptom screens best to test for returning to work. So really no good test for asymptomatic carriers. We need to engineer the workplace to be COVID-proof. There are medications in clinical trials, and hopefully we'll see more that actually work really well. And the vaccines, we may have good news by September. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Howie Severino. So can I now present Mr. Howie Severino? Howie, you may take the floor.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much, FINEX, for inviting me, and I'm very honored to be here. I also want to thank Dr. Salvana for that very insightful and informative presentation. I want to thank Dr. Salvana for his service to the public for the past several months. He's been tireless, not just in making presentations like this, but we follow him on Twitter and in social media. He's not afraid of controversy, by the way, and debate and argument. And the people who are following the unfolding of this disease really appreciate his frankness and his generosity in sharing information. Finally, I want to thank Domingo Go, the person who introduced us. Domingo didn't mention that we were dorm mates at the Ateneo. I was a high school dormer and he was a college dormer. So if you can indulge this personal aside, I didn't know Domingo when he was as a respected banking executive. So my sharpest memory of Domingo was as a friendly college student walking around the dorm in his pajamas, making wisecracks. So it's kind of startling for me to see him in such a kagalang-galang na situation. So I had to mention that, Domingo. So thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm going to switch now. I'm going to share the screen now with my presentation. All right, as Domingo mentioned, I've been a journalist for the past 32 years, but it wasn't all in television. I've been doing a documentary with GMA for the past 18 years. So I had a journalism career even before television. I was working in print, and also more recently I've done a lot of online journalism. The difference with television is that it's a lot more physical. It's a lot more, you really have to get the pictures. You need video. When I was working on the newspaper, you could sit in your bedroom and do a dozen phone calls and be able to put together a good story. Same thing with working online, but television is different. So, these are the kinds of activities that you need to do when doing a television. We cover stories underwater. We cover stories on top of the water. Here I am kayaking in the Estero. In Manila. All this is just to say that I've been physically fit for almost my entire life, and I have to be physically fit for this job. I don't have any preconditions. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I think I have a fairly good weight status, etc. So the cautionary tale is that anybody can get this disease. So no one can be complacent, even if you think your immunity system is strong and you're a physically fit person and you have no preconditions. I got it, and now because of the documentary I did on being a patient and a COVID survivor, I'm almost as well known now as being a COVID patient as I was as a journalist before getting this disease. But so be it. This is not a role I asked for, but I embrace it. So I've kind of become sort of a poster boy for this disease, because not everyone who's gotten this disease and recovered have been willing to talk about it openly. But I felt fairly early on that number one, I needed to be transparent so that people who have had interactions with me could easily do contact tracing and figure out whether they had close contact with me during the incubation period. And at the same time, gusto ko rin unahan yung mga chismis, no? I mean, after all, I appear on TV, so kung magkaroon ng chismis, baka mali pa yung mga lumabas na information. So very early on, I decided to disclose to the public and to my neighbors. That was very important, that, you know, I needed to be accepted by my community, and they were very understanding because they didn't know that I had it. Walang umabot na balita sa kanila. So I was the first one to tell them that I had this, that I was feeling some symptoms, but I was taking precautions. My family was taking precautions, and I was updating them the whole time. So I didn't experience any discrimination from my community, which is different from what a lot of patients and survivors have suffered. No, this is a very stigmatized disease, and even after you've recovered, and you know, theoretically your immune system is much stronger than, or you're more immune to this, or you're less likely to be reinfected than most people. People are still afraid of you. So to me, one of the main lessons from my own experience is that transparency and early disclosure are important. Even if it's not to the public, but just the people you work with, the people who live around you, it's better to be honest with them than try to hide this disease. Anyway, I'm going to try to discuss my experience in a few minutes. I had a fever for a week, and I was nursing it at home. And then when the fever wouldn't go down, you know, the doctors in my family said, you know, that could be COVID, so you better have a checkup. So I got a checkup, I got an x-ray, and they saw pneumonia in my x-ray, and I got a swab right away. But aside from the fever, I wasn't really feeling any other symptoms. I didn't have the dry cough. It was really just the fever. And there was a debate in my family whether I should even be, if I should be confined in the hospital, because if I was not positive, if I was not infected, if I just had an ordinary flu, and that's why I had a fever, baka sa hospital ba ako ma-infect? You know, so there's that debate within, I think, especially if you have mild symptoms, magpapa-hospital ka ba o hindi? You know, apart from the expense, you know, there's also kind of the danger of being infected if you weren't infected when you entered the hospital. But in the end, we decided that I would be confined. This is where I was being wheelchaired to my room already. This is the first day. And then I had a swab, and I tested positive. 4 days, you know, the test results came out 3 days after the test, or 4 days after the test, and my infectious disease attending physician immediately put me on chloroquine, 250 mg every day for 10 days. You know, the dosage is important because there have been studies that higher dosages carry higher risks. You know? And of course, this is a fairly controversial medicine, but I didn't know it at that time. You know, it was, you know, I entered the hospital May 26, where, you know, the lockdown started in mid-March. Sorry, March 26. The lockdown started in mid-March, and I was hospitalized by the last week of March 26, and I didn't know a lot of I didn't know about all the drug therapies. I know a lot more now, of course, no, but I was fairly early on. That's fairly early because that was the first lockdown. There wasn't a lot of information about these drugs. So when the doctor told me, "Oh, we're going to put you on chloroquine," is that okay? I immediately said yes. I mean, I'm assuming my attending physicians know much better than me. But I'll be discussing the controversies about this a little bit later. And I know that Dr. Salvana touched on this. But before I continue, I just want to address a question that's very frequently asked of me, which is, alam mo ba kung paano ka na-infect? That is often asked, and to be honest, I don't know. I really don't know because, you know, I, as a journalist, of course, I've been finding out about this disease even when it was just prevalent in China. And when, you know, the first patients were identified in the Philippines, my colleagues and I were already starting to practice the safety protocols of not getting near our interviewees, you know, not shaking hands anymore, et cetera. So we were already being I was being very careful already starting early March, but life was continuing as normal. Otherwise, I even watched a movie. I didn't sit next to anyone, but you know, I was still attending events. I wasn't shaking hands, but you know, events were going on as normal. This is early March. I even attended the dinner for my mother-in-law, who's like 89 years old. You know, so I was doing a lot of normal things. So maybe that's where I got infected, from somebody who wasn't showing any symptoms. I didn't have any close contact with any positive cases. So the short answer to that question is no, I don't know. So I think, I don't think, again, it's a cautionary tale that even if you think you're being careful, you can't assume that you're not going to get this. You can't be overconfident about not getting this disease. So, so they were putting me on chloroquine, which meant that I was at risk of some severe side effects, one of which was cardiac arrest. So if they put you on hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, one of the potential side effects is cardiac arrest and, of course, death. If your heart stops, then especially if you're not in the hospital. But if you're in a hospital, you have a pretty good chance of surviving. But it's still very, very dangerous. So what they're doing to me now is called an electrocardiogram, where they're monitoring the electric currents going through my heart. And they had to do this every day to make sure that my heart was not out of rhythm, because once it was out of rhythm, then that means the chloroquine is having bad side effects and then you have to stop it. Luckily, I didn't experience the bad side effects of chloroquine, and I like to think that it helped in me getting well. But of course, I wanted to show this because chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine became kind of famous or notorious worldwide because of President Donald Trump when he started promoting it, you know, back in, I think, April. And then in May, he told reporters at a press conference that he was taking hydroxychloroquine even if he wasn't sick. He was taking it as some kind of preventive medicine, and which kind of alarmed doctors, I think, worldwide, because number one, it wasn't, you know, FDA approved. It hadn't gone through the proper clinical trials. It had all of these side effects, which Donald Trump was not talking about. And of course, if you're not sick, you shouldn't be taking it, right? But so that's how a lot of people became aware of hydroxychloroquine and its kind of cousin in the drug industry, chloroquine. They're both originally anti-malarial drugs, but supposedly there's anecdotal evidence that these drugs have had some success in other countries, but there's no clinical trials. So right now, there are 4 drug therapies that are undergoing global solidarity trials. Dr. Salvana mentioned this a little earlier, and the clinical trials for these 4 drug therapies are being done in a collaborative fashion among, I think, almost 40 countries and hundreds of hospitals and medical centers and thousands of enrolled patients. And it's basically to expedite or to speed up the search for a cure, search for an effective drug therapy. See, Dr. Salvana mentioned some of these drugs earlier, so I'm not going to go through the technical aspects of it. I just want to say that I've been doing stories on this. You know, people think because I survived this disease, I must be some kind of expert, which I'm not. I'm just another journalist or layman who's just been reading up on it. But of course, I'm interested. I'm probably more interested in the ordinary person. I'm doing a story on this person, my former colleague, who's a COVID patient now, who is one of the 250 or so patient enrollees in the Philippines in the solidarity trials for the 4 drug therapies. He's being given remdesivir, one of the drugs in this trial. He couldn't choose, of course, and neither could his doctor choose. You kind of register with the World Health Organization and you're assigned a particular drug. So he's been taking it, and he was a lot worse off before, and he's getting better now. Of course, the data's not in, so it's hard to say whether the drug has actually had a role in his getting better. Now, I want to say a few things about this disease. This is my hand. I rarely get sick. It's been a long time since I was last hospitalized, and not for anything major. This is really the only time that I had any kind of serious illness. And what complicates COVID is that aside from the physical effects, there's a huge psychological, mental health aspect here, because I mentioned the stigma involved in discrimination. It's also very lonely because you can't receive visitors, your family can't be there. Alam nyo, tayo mga Pilipino, pag may pasyente tayo sa pamilya sa ospital, hindi natin iniiwan yan. No? That's why there are cots or beds or long sofas in a lot of hospital rooms, because we expect a family member to stay with us most of the time, right? You can't do that with COVID patients because they can't even go inside the hospital. They can't even peek inside your door to ask you how you are. So your only connection to them, your only social connection really to the outside world is through telephone, texting, etc. And when they couldn't find a vein on my left hand, they had to put the IV line in my right hand, which is my writing hand. I'm a right-handed person, so that's my right hand. And they put the splint on it. So I had a very, very hard time writing anything, because I write in my journal, and I'm a journalist, so I write notes a lot. And I also could not easily make phone calls. I also could not text. I could not message. I could not email very easily. So putting the splint on my right hand, I'm not blaming the nurses or the doctors for doing this, but it actually aggravated my isolation. So that's an aspect of this disease that I think is underappreciated, and I think it's not as studied as much, but it's a huge part of COVID. And if we consider that the mental part of any kind of disease is a big part of your physical recovery, I think if we don't pay more attention to the mental health aspect of COVID, then I think we're not improving the patient's overall chances of recovery. So I've been telling doctors, especially psychologists, clinical psychologists, and psychiatrists, that we have to pay more attention to the mental health aspect, not just of patients, but everybody. This lockdown, especially among children, they can't go out. Many of them can't understand why. I mean, this has to be processed with them. There's a huge emotional, psychological, and mental toll that this is taking on everyone. I'm sure you, as banking and business executive, you're thinking a lot about the economic toll of all of this. But there's a huge psychological, emotional, and mental toll on everyone, even if you're not sick or with this disease or not infected with this disease. I know a couple of other people who have come down with this disease who are also hospitalized. We've formed a kind of a little club of survivors. I also know patients who didn't make it, who passed away, But this is one person who survived, si Isa Calzado, and she was telling me, after she recovered, she said, I was on an oxygen machine the whole time I was in the hospital, and you never realize you don't realize how important every breath is. And my big takeaway from my experience is that every breath is a blessing. Every breath is a blessing. And I can say, just having experienced this and exchanging notes with other survivors, another survivor is another friend of mine. Kababata ko to, si Senator Sani Angara. We kind of went to school together. It's actually a transformative experience. You kind of appreciate the essential things in life a lot more, and it helps you focus on what's really important. And in a way, it's kind of a blessing in disguise. Especially if you survive. If you survive, there are a lot of accompanying blessings. And people talk about PTSD a lot, post-traumatic stress disorder, but there's also such a thing as post-traumatic growth. That is, if you turn trauma into something positive, then you can actually experience some personal growth. And I think the country can go through something like that as well, and communities, that if you go through something like this, like a trauma like this, you can actually turn it around and make it and turn it to your advantage. And I think that's what a lot of people say when they talk about creating an improved normal. The new normal can be a better normal, and then never let a crisis go to waste. You hear things like this, and I think this has a lot to do with people thinking, trying to reimagine society. This is an opportunity to reimagine society, because we really can't go back to the normal way of doing things, especially since a lot of experts are saying it might be 2, 3, 4 years before we get a vaccine. Because the only way we're going to go back to our old normal is if we have a vaccine, and it looks like that's far off into the future. So we really have to reimagine a lot of what we do. Anyway, I just wanted to show a few shots of my frontliners. They were wearing raincoats the first few days I was there. And if you ask them, how are you doing? And they'll always say, ito, para ako nasa loob ng sauna. And, it's very hot, it's central air conditioning in the hospital, but they keep saying, they're sweating the whole time. And it's very difficult for them to go to the bathroom, because if they go to the bathroom, they have to change their PPEs. And it's, and if you have a shortage of PPEs, then you just can't keep disposing of them. You just can't keep changing. So sometimes they hold it in. If they have to go to the bathroom, sometimes they go to the bathroom maybe not once in a 12-hour shift, or just once or twice in a 12-hour shift. And you know how difficult that can be. Towards the end of my hospital stay, they started wearing more professional looking PPEs. I think these were the real PPEs. And I think it's because there was a lot of publicity about the heroism and sacrifice of frontliners. And so there was a lot of donations of supplies to them, and food and PPEs as well. I just want to mention my wife, who's very worried about me. She decided to hire a private nurse, si Gab Lazaro, who luckily for me, he was interested in documentary, and he told me, someone should do a documentary about frontliners. And I said, well, that's you. You have to produce. You have to be the one. And I said, I can teach you. Sorry. And I accidentally showed this. Yeah, and I told him I can teach you, and I did, and it kept me busy, and it kept my mind off my isolation, because there was somebody I was constantly talking to, and he helped me produce a documentary about what it's like not just to be a frontliner, but what it's like to be a patient. I mean, I was shooting him, while I was tied to my hospital bed. I couldn't get up from my hospital bed very often, because I was attached to my IV pole all the time. But he was free to walk around. So he was shooting his life as a frontliner, walking home in the dark alone, because there was no public transportation, having Facebook Live, FaceTime interactions with his 2-year-old daughter. So I was telling him, you're like a patient. You're in the hospital all the time, and you're also separated or isolated from your family. So that's what a lot of people don't realize about the sacrifices of frontliners, that they're also isolated because they can't interact normally with their families. Sorry, I'm trying to get rid of this. Okay, yeah. So I eventually wrote about him, and after a few days, I started feeling better. I was producing my documentary here the last few days before I was discharged. And here I am being discharged, and I was surprised, because as soon as I exited, there was a long line of frontliners who were waiting for me. They were applauding. They were applauding for me. They were congratulating me and cheering me. And, but I was applauding for them, because without them, I probably wouldn't be alive. I was getting, really devoted care. And apparently what I've found out is that this is what frontliners do for a lot all over the world for patients who survive, because it's a big achievement, especially in the beginning, when there were more reports of deaths than recoveries. Every patient who survives was considered a big victory against this disease, not just a victory for the patient, but a big victory of everyone. And so it was another frontliner who captured this moment. It was really memorable for me. And before I left this message. Before I left the hospital, I left this message on the whiteboard in my room, and just a message to the frontliners, and the kind of sinasabi ko nga, they've been getting a lot of praise and and honor from a lot of us. But ang sinasabi ko sa mga fellow survivors, sa fellow patients ko, I mean, you'll never know just how devoted and just how committed these people are until you've been a patient, because doon mo talaga makita, because we're contagious, we're sick, and you could see them attend to you with the utmost devotion, and they're strangers, they don't even know you, and they're not exact, especially nurses and med techs, they're not exactly highly paid, right? And yet they're attending to you with so much commitment and so much dedication. I can never repay them, and you can only pay it forward, And one way I tried paying it forward is producing this documentary where I actually honor them. A big part of my documentary about being a patient was really about the frontliners who attended to me. It's kind of one of the few, journalists are not allowed to enter hospitals, but I'm an exception. I was an exception of a journalist who was given access to a hospital because I was a patient. So nandun ako sa loob. So I decided to produce this documentary. But even if I was discharged, I had a problem because I tested negative after I left when I was discharged. But then you're supposed to get 2 consecutive negative tests on the PCR, and then I tested positive. So I spent another month in isolation. In quarantine, isolation, even after I left the hospital. So I was in isolation until the first week of May after I left the hospital on April 3. And it was only in the first week of May, I think it's May 5, that these frontliners came to my house in Batangas to give me the results of my last 2 PCR tests, which were both negative. So, which meant that I could be considered officially recovered, because you can only be considered officially recovered by the Department of Health if you have 2 consecutive negative results from the PCR test. And here they're handing me my results as if, it's a diploma. I'm graduating from this disease finally and kind of entering kind of the normal world. And since then, I've been able to interact with my family. Of course, we still retain the physical distance, but I'm not isolated anymore. This is my son, so we've been biking around Batangas. I live in Batangas, and here we are. Luckily for me, I've been able to resume part of my old life, which is very physical. I do a lot of recreational activities. I bike, I kayak, I dive, etc. I swim. And I feel very, very lucky that I'm starting to do all of those things again. And of course, now I'm because of that documentary, which has had something like 9 million views on YouTube and Facebook. I've kind of become a poster boy for this disease. And then after one of the great advantages of being recovered and having antibodies is you're able to donate plasma. So you could help others. You could help gravely ill patients with your plasma, which is considered a liquid gold because that's the color. That's extracted from our blood. We know, our blood is colored red, but then when they extract the plasma, it's colored yellow. So they call it liquid gold. And here, once you donate, I mean, the health workers are happy, the frontliners are happy because they have something that they can use to help save other people's lives. And of course, this whole process was televised on 24 Horas, and partly to encourage other survivors to come forward and to help out and donate their plasma. And here's a poster. And since then, I've kind of adjusted my role at the network. They assigned me to be a safety officer, thinking that I have this experience. I'd be I'd be not really an authority, but maybe I'd have some kind of maybe some kind of moral authority or some kind of influence over my colleagues to be a safety officer. So I've helped develop protocols, and Dr. Salvana mentioned this earlier, that every workplace, every company has to develop its own protocols according to your functions, according to your business, according to the nature of what you do. And of course, we're journalists. We never really stop covering. And one of the things we do is that we have to find ways of shooting material even from a distance and recording material. So, we luckily, we have training in doing this. And so we do most of our interviews now using boom mics. Boom mic is basically a microphone attached to a long pole. So to maintain distance from our subjects, and these are examples of that. Um, and you know, one reason why sometimes we have to get near, cameramen have to, you know, elbow themselves into crowds, is because they need they need close-ups of the person of our subjects, and who are being blocked by crowds. But if you bring around a ladder like this or a footstool, you're able to stand on it while shooting, and with a long lens, you can actually sometimes get a better shot of your subject without getting near. So this is another way of adapting to the disease and kind of being able to do our jobs safely, and still, you know, and still being able to get the same kind of material. And of course, something we always have to remind our colleagues, my colleagues, is we have to disinfect equipment. We have our own tent in the GMA compound for disinfecting our equipment. We disinfect ourselves, you know, before we get back into our vehicle. We disinfect our shoes. We disinfect our clothes. You know, this is not just to protect ourselves, but this is also to inspire confidence in the people that we interview, in the people that we approach, the people who see us working in the field. We want them to feel that, you know, we're even if we're there, we're making this kind of effort to protect them as well. So, you know, when we try to protect ourselves from infection, we are also protecting the people we are with. We are also protecting our families and friends, our colleagues, and the subjects, the strangers that we interact with in the field. So we want them to have confidence that they will not easily get infected by us just because we're in their vicinity. This is the kind of equipment that we give every day. We give alcohol every day, etc. Just a warning that we got from a medical director of a hospital. She was saying, you know, you guys are, you know, we see you on TV wearing your mask, but a lot of the people you cover are not wearing masks. So you could be infected by them. So, you know, remind the public, and maybe us as influencers ourselves, we should be reminding the public to, you know, let's not ease up on this. You know, this is far from over, and we can't be, even if the lockdowns have been relaxed a little bit in some places, we can't get complacent about this. It's still a long way off before we defeat this disease, before we overcome these challenges. Especially since things are, you know, the world is changing despite this disease. Even with, you know, in changing in ways that have little to do with this disease. I mean, in the United States and many other countries, people are protesting, and some people are protesting, you know, there's the social justice issues in the United States, and it's kind of spread in other countries of the world, and they're exposing, and, you know, and forget social distancing in situations like this, right? So this kind of increases the risk. Although I've been reading some stories about recent studies that show that when you're outdoors, there's a less risk of getting infected. But, you know, if you might be outdoors, but if people are not wearing masks and are interacting without any kind of physical distancing, then it could actually be very, very risky for you. Here in the Philippines, you know, the police have been and government has been warning us not to engage in this kind of protest, partly because of the pandemic, but you know, people have been protesting anyway. I just wanted to show this. They've been protesting against the anti-terror bill, but notice that at least here near the UP Diliman campus, they were protesting with physical distancing. Which is actually, which is another way. This is another example of people adapting adapting a common activity to the safety protocols of this disease. So basically, what they're saying is, you know, we're going to protest, but we're going to try to keep ourselves safe as well. And I have to hand it to the discipline of these people. And I'm not saying all of them are like that. I'm not saying that all protests are like this, but I think this is what we need to do. We cannot stop life. We have to eventually resume what we were doing before, whether it's dining in, whether it's going to the office, whether it's protesting, whether it's walking around in the park, whether it's jogging and biking. But there are ways that we can do this safely. So anyway, thank you so much for listening, and thank you for your time. And thank you again to FINEX for inviting me here and enabling me to give this presentation.
Thank you, Howie, for sharing with us your experience, and it certainly has been very insightful, no? And if you don't mind, may we ask both you and Dr. Edsel for some open forum. We do have some questions from the floor, no? And if I may just ask you these questions that were not answered previously. So I think since we're FINEX, we always talk about money. The first question from Antonio Innumerable was, how much did the treatment cost you? Did PhilHealth cover any of the expenses?
PhilHealth, okay, because I was among the first patients. I was patient 28, no? And I got hospitalized in the first month of the lockdown. And I think this was the policy of the government before. PhilHealth covered my entire hospitalization.
Wow.
I didn't pay anything. I didn't pay doctor's fees. I didn't pay for any medicines. May baon pa akong face mask, alcohol, and may baon pa akong chloroquine. They gave me medicines. It was all for free. And I'm very grateful. Although I know that came from our taxes, right? I don't want to assume this was charity on the part of, this is simply kind of a dole out or a giveaway. This came from our taxes, but I'm glad it was used this way because I benefited. I'm very sorry that they haven't continued it. I think, of course, resources are finite, so I don't think the PhilHealth still has that capability today.
All right. I have a question.
By the way, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. One final point, because you asked how much the treatment cost. It was over 300,000 pesos. My 11 days in the hospital, 300,000 pesos. PhilHealth covered the entire thing.
Good to know that just in case you had to pay for it yourself, that was how much you would have ended up paying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So we have another question, but this time for Dr. Edsel Salvana. With the imminent approval of ELISA-based qualitative and quantitative antibody tests, would you suggest that this method that uses existing ELISA equipments in hospitals and ambulatory laboratories be used to do massive targeted testing for suspected COVID-19 cases to either replace the expensive and tedious RT-PCR tests, or even to use it to take up the slack caused by the lack of RT-PCR testing centers vis-a-vis the population? Dr. Salvana?
Yeah, no, that's not appropriate because our antibody tests are not good for diagnosing acute disease. It still has to be RT-PCR for people who have symptoms. The ELISAs are better if you're going to use them for testing mga populations to look for seroprevalence. Ibig sabihin, how much has there been disease in a community already? And they're much better than the rapid tests for that process. It's called surveys. But you don't test every single one in the population. You only test a properly randomized sample.
All right. And then there's from an anonymous attendee, doctor. What can you say to be included that GCQ, the NCR, and other regions, but cases of COVID-19 are still rising?
Right. Yeah, so there's a few things that we look at when we decide whether to downgrade, upgrade, or maintain a region. And this has been fairly transparent naman. First of all is case doubling time, meaning how fast the cases go up. The current doubling time for NCR is about 6.9 days. Kaya nga sabi ni Harry Roque na pasang-awa tayo kasi we were just at the number na 7-day doubling time. Actually, the higher the doubling time, the better. So actually, pasang-awa talaga. Kasi technically, dapat nag-slide back ng konti, but it was just a very small thing. And so, that's one. The other is critical care capacity, how much we are filling up our ICUs. And ito yung naging problema talaga sa Cebu. Aside from having a higher case doubling time, they started filling up their hospitals. And so that's why they decided to go hindi lang man ECQ ECQ talaga, because they were really alarmed about that issue. So each province has a doubling time that we calculate along with yung tinatawag na critical care capacity. And this is what the IATF uses to make decisions. Of course, there are other considerations depending on, like, for instance, Baguio has a very good contact tracing digital app, so that's one of the things we take into consideration as well. Pero this is all science-based. There are parameters. They can be modified. The regions can appeal as well. Yung sa Manila, as has been mentioned, pasang-awa, but also because we don't necessarily want to shut down again kasi grabe yung economic consequences of shutting down. Yeah.
There's a, let's see, there's a question naman for Howie, no? Howie, it says here, no, and this is from okay. The question is, let's see, huh? So it says here, Howie, that they were questioning, did you have moments where you had a conversation with God? I guess that was really referring to if you went to a stage wherein you were hallucinating or something.
Well, I was hallucinating, but I didn't need to hallucinate to talk to God. You really start thinking of what happens after death, in that situation. I mean, to be very honest, there was a point where I was delirious. I couldn't sleep. I don't know if it was the effect of the chloroquine. I couldn't sleep for a couple of nights, and I really wanted to sleep, and I just felt very scared. I was all alone, and it got to the point where I thought I was going to die, and I called up my wife and to say goodbye. Basically, I was giving her some billions, no? So I was, asking her, if I die, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, and I was doing that, and yes, I started talking to God. To be honest, I'm not very religious, but I was talking to God. I was praying, and I even promised all kinds of things if I survived, if somehow I survived this. That was probably one of the worst nights that I didn't think I would survive, but I promised God that if I survived, I would be a much better person, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. This is for coming from Luis Juan Oreta. Dr. Salvana, please comment on the news that came out today, which said dexamethasone reduced COVID-19 mortality by 30%. I thought I saw that in one of your slides.
Yeah, so that's true for severe disease for people on ventilators. It decreased it by 20% in those who need oxygen but are not on ventilators. Pero it had no effect on people with mild disease. And so this is actually because part of the things that kill people with COVID is that the immune system is on overdrive, especially for people with severe disease. Parang inaatake yung lungs. So we give steroids to modulate the immune response para hindi siya masyadong mag-overdrive. Now, the danger here is pag inisip ng tao, okay naman pala yung steroids, inom tayo lahat ng steroids. Actually, steroids will decrease your immune system. So baka mas lalo ka magka-COVID kung wala ka pang COVID. So this is something that we use only in instances where the risk is outweighed by the benefit because there are risks for dexamethasone.
So we shouldn't self-medicate, no? I mean, it should be a prescribed medication as needed.
Yes, lalo na sa steroids because it can really harm you.
So while you're there, we have a question from Feliz Mendoza. Is Philippines not capable of producing its own version of vaccines against COVID-19? What seems to be the challenges? Please enlighten us. Thank you.
Yeah, so mahaba ang vaccine development. It's all from yung tinatawag na preclinical, you're doing animal studies, all the way to phase 1 to 4. Marami nang nauna sa atin because they were working on MERS vaccines and SARS vaccines.
Yes.
So, I mean, we could do that, but it will take us 10 years to make a vaccine. Whereas what we can do is collaborate with those that already have advanced vaccines. We can be a site we can think about opening manufacturing facilities here. So there's a better way to do it. And we are going to collaborate with vaccine trials that's already been announced.
So in relation to my earlier question, Dr. Salvana, are you satisfied with the flattening of the curve in the Philippines so far? How can we flatten the curve further given the density of Metro Manila and Cebu and other big cities?
Right, so that's really a concern. Yung the whole concept of flattening the curve naman is not really to kill to be able to stop the epidemic. You'd like to do that, but it's very, very difficult. But there's no immunity kasi, and this virus is so contagious. The whole point of locking down was so that our healthcare system doesn't get overwhelmed. And so what we have to do is continue increasing our healthcare capacity, and then we have to do the things that limit the transmission of the virus because we cannot afford it anymore from an economic standpoint to do those widespread lockdowns again. What we're hoping for is itong mga localized lockdowns kung may clusters of cases, fast testing and contact tracing. And again, wearing a mask decreases the risk of getting COVID by 85%. And physical distancing by 80%, face shield by 78%. So if we have everybody do that, we can keep the numbers low without having to go back to lockdowns.
Okay. This is a question from Raquel Nakayama. Dr. Salvana, I understand that some COVID survivors have donated their plasma. I think this is what Howie did, no? Have these been actually applied to treat COVID patients?
Yes, we've actually been doing them. Most of them do okay. The concern lang is kasi ang hirap gumawa ng clinical trial for COVID na plasma. Kasi walang gustong mag-placebo. Walang gustong hindi i-treat. So what we're doing is, historically kasi, this is something that's been applied and it will continue to happen. But yun nga, compassionate use. It's very difficult rin kasi if you're using plasma, you're harvesting antibodies. Iba-iba ang levels ng antibodies ng tao So it's very difficult to standardize the amount of antibody you get from each person. But they are working on itong tinatawag na monoclonal antibodies, which are actually artificially produced antibodies that you can make in massive quantities and you can standardize the dose. And so these are actually being done right now. Hopefully we'll have results in the next 1 to 3 months. And they will be even better than convalescent plasma because then you can make them on demand.
Okay. And this is a question from Terry Magleo. Why is the percentage recovery nationwide very small since January? Parañaque Mayor reported 65% recovery in his city.
Yeah, that's like with what Mr. Howie said na kasi rini-require nila dati to na you had to have 2 negative RT-PCRs. And natural nung biglang dumami yung cases, they were really prioritizing the ones who were new cases na yun muna yung RT-PCR natin kesa yung recoveries. But now that WHO and CDC have actually moved to a time-based recovery, you don't need to test people anymore. If you're well na and you've been isolated for 14 days, you don't need testing anymore to be called recovered. And this is in line with global standards. Kasi in Singapore and in Korea, they found out na after 10 days, the virus that you're shedding, even if you're RT-PCR positive pa, it's already dead virus. It can't infect people anymore. So as long as you have no more fever, no more symptoms, at the end of 14 days, you're considered recovered. Sisipa yan. You'll see a lot of people recover in the next few days.
Okay, one final question, and this is from Vilma Cervantes for Dr. Salvana. What is your view on government allocating much larger budget for tourism versus COVID-related needs of the healthcare system?
Yeah, I don't know how to comment on that because I don't know the entire budget naman Pero let's understand also that tourism is one of the hardest hit industries. So I really think they really need a lot of help. I mean, these are people who are talking about people's jobs, people's lives. So I think that it's not an issue of giving some to someone and then konti dito. I mean, these are continuing things. There are continuing subsidies coming in. I think that everybody needs help, and any help that is given by the government to different sectors of society are just as valuable because we're talking about people's lives and livelihoods.
Okay. I have one final question also for Howie. No? Howie, you're in a unique situation wherein you are a media practitioner, no? In a very large TV network, which is GMA7. In what way do you think that the coverage of the news, is it influenced by how the government wants us to keep the situation under control, or do we still have the responsibility to inform the general public the way it really is, or the truth? No? I mean, do you balance that out by making sure that the general population doesn't panic versus telling them the real story, Howie?
Well, our primary role in society is to seek the facts and present them in a way that so that people will pay attention and have a basis for their decisions and actions. And facts can come from the government. It can come from doctors like Dr. Salvana. It can come from people like yourselves. Government is just one source of facts, and it's up to us to verify them. Basically, the discipline of verification is the essence of what we do, and it's very difficult. And we do it in a very imperfect way. I mean, it's far from perfect, but you know, we don't exist to be the mouthpiece of government. But we will sit through a press conference when the president makes us wait 3 or 4 hours before he makes a statement late in the evening. We wait up for that. All of us wait up for that. And then we try to synthesize that with the other information that we get.
Okay, that's I'm glad to hear you say that we still stand for the truth, no? And then, well, that ends our question and answer. I know we've gone over time. Thank you to our speakers for an engaging discussion, and thank you for your time and patience with us, no, and sharing us with all of your experience and knowledge. To formally close today's general membership meeting, may I call once again FINEX President Jeng Pascual to adjourn this meeting.
Thank you very much, George. But before I adjourn the meeting, I'd like to also extend my thanks to Dr. Edsel, Salvana, and Mr. Howie Severino for sharing their stories and arming us all with the facts on COVID-19 and for busting a few myths that emerged in some of the questions. So thank you very much, gentlemen. I'd like to also thank George for moderating the Q&A today, and to Nanette and the rest of the programs and meetings committee for arranging another relevant GMM. So I hereby adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. That ends our session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.